Welcome to Under Investigation, Stories Beyond the Badge. Join a seasoned detective as he steps away from the crime scene and into the lives of fascinating individuals. Through candid interviews and thought-provoking conversations, we explore the stories that shape us, covering personal struggles, triumphs, and the powerful intersections of faith, family, and life. Each episode brings unique perspectives and inspiring insights from people living diverse, authentic lives. Now, let's dive into today's story.
Hey everybody, welcome to another episode. Appreciate that you're joining us again. Always appreciate it. It's been a very busy couple of weeks around here for me professionally and even personally. So, just been really busy. So I don't have another guest. This is 2 weeks in a row or 2 episodes in a row. But I wanted to share with you a little story. So first of all, this is June. We're in June now. So it is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And kind of a big deal around here at our household, simply because for some of you, you may know my wife works for a mental health, suicide awareness and prevention and education nonprofit. So we're pretty passionate about that in our household for many reasons. But I just want to acknowledge that. And this episode's going to wrap around a little bit of this theme anyways. So I just want to kind of throw that out there at the very beginning. But today I want to talk about death and my experience with death, professionally speaking. Again, we've talked in the past, a few of our episodes, that some of the wild and crazy things that we've seen, or I've seen specifically, or law enforcement in general has to deal with. But I want to talk about my early days, and one of the first, not the first, but I would say the first really impactful one that I dealt with. So many years ago, I've been in law enforcement for over 25 years, and so I just want to be very clear that this is not a story relating to my current employer. This story occurred well over 20 years ago in my profession when I first started out, and specifically 28 years ago, because that's how long I've been in law enforcement. And it was one of the first things that I recall impacting me as a young deputy sheriff in the agency that I work for. So today I want to talk about, and we'll maybe I'll title this like my first body or my first traumatic body. As everybody knows, part of law enforcement, we respond to medical situations. We respond to violence sometimes, whether it's homicide or suicide or everything in between that, a car crash, several different things. And that's actually what this is going to revolve around. So early in my career, I'm talking within the first 6 months of my career, I can't really recall the first time I saw a dead person, professionally speaking. I'd gone to funerals and so forth when I was a teenager, but professionally speaking, old folks die, young folks die, in their sleep sometimes. But I hadn't had a lot of experience at that point with traumatic death. And what I mean by like that is violent. So there was a call early in my career when I was driving around, and I guess just to kind of build this picture for you just a little bit, is I had been in law enforcement for certainly less than 6 months. And at that point, again, some of my listeners have heard me talk about, I was quote unquote God's gift to law enforcement. I loved my career early on. I was having fun. I was doing the things that I trained for, and all these experiences and having an impact, and things were going very well. And not that necessarily changed through this incident, but certain things change a person, and this is certainly one of those stories. But early on, I remember riding in my squad car, and I'm getting a call, and at the time we used 10 codes, and where I work now, we haven't used 10 codes for long time. But early on, I remember getting a call for what we called a 1052, and what that code was back then was an accident with injuries. And I was told that a pickup truck had collided with a semi. And that's really all I knew. And to be quite honest with you, that stage of my career, I was, excited maybe to respond to a crash like that, because it's like, oh wow, I get to do all this high adrenaline stuff. And so I start responding to the call. And the county that I worked for was pretty large at the time, and emergency driving can be anywhere between a couple minutes and 45 minutes, depending on how far you had to go. And there's plenty of stories behind that and what we would do to kind of kill the time between those longer runs. But, there's certainly times that this job can hit you like a freight train. And for me, it was certainly, this call was one of those first examples. So I get the call, and of course, fire gets started, and the ambulance gets started, and where I was working at the time, both of those services are volunteers, so the response time is generally a little longer, which isn't a really big deal to me. But I remember going to this call super fast, lights and sirens, and I remember coming up to the scene, and I remember that this semi truck, what it was doing, it had stopped. It was at the owner's residence. He was pulling into the driveway of the residence. And just again, so you're picturing this, this is rural. This is out in the middle of nowhere. There's, house here, house there kind of a thing, and kind of a curvy and hilly county road. And I remember coming up the crest of this hill and coming right over the hill and being surprised that it was right there. And, really had to hit the brakes, quite frankly. And immediately thought, I'm like, I gotta back up. I mean, I gotta get my lights so people that are coming aren't surprised by this, because it was very clear within the first second or two what had most likely happened. And what did occur was that the semi truck had passed his own driveway and was backing up the semi truck and trailer into the driveway. So that, when he was to pull out, the next business day or whenever the day was that he worked next, that he could just pull out and turn, onto the road and get going. But what had occurred was, as he was backing up, they have to intentionally jackknife, or he had to intentionally jackknife the semi truck to get lined up to get into this driveway. And it was at that point where he was jackknifed that this pickup truck came over the hill. And basically it was a roadblock, for lack of better terms. And this pickup truck basically hit the trailer of the semi truck and went right underneath it. And that was pretty apparent to me, and quite frankly, if I wouldn't have been paying attention, it could have easily have been a squad car that went underneath that trailer. It was just a bad location where this occurred. And so I jump out of my car, I run up, check, the driver of the semi truck is outside, trying to, look into the driver's door of the pickup truck, which was partially underneath his trailer. And then, I could just see him running around, essentially, not really sure what he was doing necessarily, but I knew he would, it looked like he was trying to check on the driver, I guess would be my conclusion there. So I go running up and I check on the driver of the semi. Hey, are you okay? Yep. And then I redirect my attention to this pickup truck that was, basically had its cab torn off, because, as the truck went underneath the trailer, it essentially tore the windshield and the most of the cab right off. As you get up to the door and I open up, he slumped over towards the passenger seat and wasn't responding, wasn't saying anything, and there was a lot of blood. And mind you, I'm a pretty new deputy. I mean, if this was to happen today, my reaction probably would have been a lot different. But at that point, my exposure to traumatic injury was not as great, I guess, as it is today. I guess I'm a little more jaded now, but back then, everything was new, really. And so I grabbed the shoulder of this guy, and as I went to pull him, it was very, very clear to me that he was deceased. And the reason why I knew that is because about 3/4 of his head was hanging over the shoulder, basically. He wasn't completely decapitated, but he was mostly decapitated. I mean, you could, without being overly graphic, because I know I can be a little desensitized at time. I don't want to make people envision everything, but it was bad. I mean, it was very, very clear that this guy was deceased, and so I didn't even pull him out of the truck. I just left him there and redirected my attention back to the driver of the truck and like, hey, are you okay? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what happened? So I kind of started getting the details on what had occurred. And of course, now I'm hearing sirens coming, and it's the local fire department, or I'm assuming, because that's usually the next set of sirens, either that or the ambulance. And I just remember, holy crap, what am I doing here? Like what, I knew procedurally what to happen, but it was so overwhelming that things like slowed down, and like mental check boxes. Like, what do I need to do? I need to notify my boss. I need to, be careful with the scene. Scene safety is a big thing, and I had intuitively I had, parked my squad at the top of the hill. So, no more super speeders would come by and cause more problems. So, I mean, certain things were natural, but, certain things I had to like slow down and think about it. And I just remember all the blood. I mean, the blood in the truck, and now it was, out on the ground, and glass all over the place. And the truck was just in pieces, essentially. And then I remember, when I first moved this guy by his shoulder, the unnatural look of a mostly decapitated person. And it was a lot. It was a lot for a 22-year-old, to handle and to really be in charge of everything. So, but everything was kind of robotic at that point. But these emotions, they were kind of coming and going, throughout the time that I was there. But I remember hearing the sirens pulling up, and I directed them, hey, look, we got to close this road down because we got the semi that's blocking the road. I kind of gave them directions. Yep, no problem. Well, I went to refocus again, did some notifications, let my boss know what was going on. Again, kind of started dealing with the driver of the semi again, asking more questions. Obviously in my mind, I'm like, I have to make sure that he's not that I felt that he was, but, is he intoxicated, or is there any, criminal piece of this that I have to really be careful of, or is it just a tragic accident, So, because we certainly investigate crimes differently than accidents, per se. I mean, I want to hang completely on those words, but, there's obviously a difference on how we handle things if we think a crime is suspected. So as I'm talking to the driver, I see the firefighters, coming up to the scene, and they're doing their checks. Of course, firefighters are, first responders as well. At least, they were where I was at, like not EMT levels, but like first responders, like the, what the level of training is what I mean, not necessarily first responders as, police, fire, and EMS. And I remember at one point looking, and I saw some firefighters, and this is it's if it wasn't so tragic, it's funny, but it's not. But it is. I mean, it's really bizarre to kind of wrap my head around this, even today, 25 plus years later. Um, but I look over and the firefighters are doing. They had pulled this deceased person out of the pickup truck, and they're doing CPR on this guy. And I remember thinking, what are you doing? What are you doing? I mean, there's certain things in a traumatic event, right? That we if somebody's deceased, you don't need to do CPR on somebody. And he was clearly deceased by what I had, by how I explained earlier. But I don't know if it was an adrenaline thing or a focus thing, but they had actually removed him from the pickup truck and they were doing CPR. And I remember getting so pissed because this is, a potential crime scene. And now you've moved my, I'm not trying to sound mean, but you moved my evidence, the deceased from his final location that was in the truck to now he's on the road and you're doing chest compressions on a guy who's basically headless. And I'm like, what are you thinking? Now, to offer a little grace in a situation like this, I will say, after all these years, that I know that sometimes you have tunnel vision when you're performing tasks that you're overwhelmed with. And the only thing that settles with me today as I repeat this story is that they had tunnel vision and didn't even notice the obvious injury that would, prevent any resuscitation of him. And I remember yelling at these guys, and I don't remember the words I used, but I imagine at the time that I was in life, it probably was colorful. And I just remember the looks on their face like, oh, okay. And then they stopped. And then that was it. And, so back to focus to the driver and the other ancillary duties that I had, calling tow trucks and calling the state patrol, for them because it's a death, and they assisted us on reconstruction of crashes, which is very, very common in the state that I work. And so everything happened, right? Everything moved. The coroner came out, which up there at the time was funeral home. We had the local funeral home would come out and pick up the body and haul it off. But I just remember the weirdest things about that, and where I want to kind of bring the conversation to is I can sometimes forget what I had for dinner last Friday, or a week ago, or whatever it was. But yet there's certain things in my career that I can remember as if they happened 2 hours ago. And this is one of those. My wife, we send reels. It's terrible. I'm admitting to this publicly, but we'll send like Facebook reels back and forth, on little things that are inside jokes to each other. And a lot of those reels include like the husband being forgetful, and like, the wife in the video, will find the item right where she told him where it was when he went and looked and it wasn't, but it was there. So we send those kind of funny videos back and forth, and they are so true. So in some cases, I can literally forget what I did last week, but here I'm going 25 years ago, and because this was such an impactful and new traumatic event for me, I can close my eyes and I can picture it today. I remember the emotions of being so mad at the firefighters because obviously CPR wasn't going to work on this guy. And I remember what we like to say, the oh shit factor. which is your initial response when you see something coming up to a scene, because you kind of compare it to everything you've dealt with right up to that point in your career. And of course, I hadn't dealt with a whole lot just because of how young I was and how new I was into the profession. So I had a lot of those moments, and this was certainly one of the first ones in my career that I remember. And I certainly have had plenty since then, and my reactions probably aren't as strong because, over time, of course, we become a little desensitized. But I remember just, some of the emotions were just like, is this real? I mean, is this, like when I grabbed his shoulder to initially check on him, and when I came to the conclusion that he was, obviously deceased, but not only deceased, but in such a traumatic way, like almost questioning, is this actually happening to me? Am I seeing what I'm seeing? But the autopilot part of me kicked in, and I worked the scene as best as I could as a young deputy like that, of course. But when we got out of there, got the tow truck, got the reconstruction state trooper that came in and took care of things, got out of there, drove out, and just kind of like you replay those kind of events in your head. A, did you do everything right? Is there any gaps? Is there anything you're missing? Did you get all the questions answered that you need? Did you, do everything correctly? Because again, as a new officer or a new deputy at the time, and even today, you want to do the best you can do, right? And do it right. And that was the first real visually traumatic, physically traumatic death in my career. And I can picture it. So what's that mean, right? I mean, I've gone to hundreds of deaths since then. Most fairly, I don't want to say natural, because, when I get to the scene of a death, there's usually, unless you're a patrol officer, and that's not my role. So when I get there as a detective, it's usually not natural. It's a suicide, or it's an overdose, it's a homicide victim, crash victim, but it's not usually natural. Back then we didn't have peer support or mental wellness programs. We have everything, at least on paper, right? We have those resources at our fingertips now where they didn't back then. So you just kind of sucked it up. That's not a story you can go home and tell your wife, right? Oh, you won't believe what I did tonight. So those kind of calls follow you around. I mean, I know as I drive around, not so much where I'm at now, because I work for a fairly large city, but when I worked for this county and the county actually after this one that I worked for many years, you drive around, because I live in the area that I used to work, and you drive around and you see crosses or, markers, memorials, in various places around the county that you responded to, or I responded to specifically. And I mean, I can remember everyone there. I know there's one in a town nearby where we live that it was a fatal crash that I was on scene for, and it was pretty graphic. I remember it involved a Bronco, those old Bronco 2s, and a motorcycle that it hit head on. And you can imagine that was pretty graphic. And today, if we were to drive by there, there's still a memorial there. The area in which it happened is a little different now because they redid it was by an overpass, a train trestle basically, and they kind of redid the area there, so it's not exactly how it was when the incident occurred. But every time I drive by there, I see in my head that scene from, that's probably been 23 years ago. I can see that scene in my head very, very clearly. And I've got dozens of those kinds of stories. And I'm not asking, I'm not, as I'm listening to myself speak, it almost sounds like it's like a pity party, and it's not. It isn't. The only reason that I'm telling these stories today, is simply because we're human. We're not robots. Most of us, not all, but most of us are married. Many of us have children. We're fathers, we're mothers, we're siblings. We make mistakes sometimes. But dealing with this unnatural process of death when it's traumatic like that, it adds up. And I guess what I'm really trying to say, and I want to wrap it around this June Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, is I've done a pretty good job, I think. I guess maybe I should have my wife on here one of these times and give her opinion on it. But I think I've done a pretty good job of dealing with the traumatic things that I've been a part of over the years with this job. But I know the issues that we have to face to get through these struggles, if you will. And some of that is having good resources. And so that's what I would encourage anybody who's struggling with any kind of trauma, whether it's from law enforcement profession or not, is bottling them up is simply not going to work. You have to have a support system. And sometimes just telling the story is therapeutic. If you guys remember back to one of the very first episodes that I had a therapist on. And I agree with her 100%. Just being able to process it out loud and dumping your baggage, so to speak, unloading it, is very healthy. It helps you process it. So whether you go to a therapist or you have a great friend, great spouse, I've shared a lot with my wife, but I've been pretty good about not trying to be too specific or graphic. And there have been times that my wife's like, I don't need to hear those details. I'm like, oh yeah, you're right. I'm sorry. But yeah. So June is Men's Mental Health Awareness Month. And I want to say, I encourage men and women, if you are dealing with PTS or just a trauma response to certain things, give somebody a call, a friend. Worst case scenario, send me a message. I'll either talk to you or quite frankly, if you want, I can send you to somebody who's a professional, because I'm not. I know what I know, but I'm really good at finding resources. What cops are really good at is filing things away, which works most of the time. Or, you've heard the analogy of the glass, the water of the glass. Every incident is a little bit of water, a little bit of water, a little bit of water. And then after after a while, that water gets to the top of the glass and you keep adding it, it overflows and it spills. So by you processing these scenarios properly, it's like dumping a little bit of water all the time. So you're never going to overflow that glass. So I want to close up a little bit with just being real. That first death probably screwed me up a little more than I thought it did. Because I just probably wasn't prepared at a young 22-year-old Mike. So that introduced me to the part of the job that nobody really talks about. The part that we generally carry in silence. So thank you all for listening to me for half hour. Just a short story of what this job can do to some people. I would even suggest to all of us who are in this profession, just to different degrees. But thank you so much for supporting our podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you for sharing. Feel free to comment, to visit us on Facebook at facebook.com/weareunderInvestigation. Send us an email at weareunderInvestigation@gmail.com, or you can even send a text if you really want to, 763-634-1210. So thanks a lot for listening. We'll catch you soon. And remember, if you have any other ideas, get a hold of us and we will certainly address them. We're pretty much an open book here. Can't talk about cases we're currently working on, but we can certainly talk about older cases or experiences. But we'd love to hear from you. So don't forget to like us, to follow us, and to share us. Appreciate it, and talk to you next time.
Thanks for tuning in to Under Investigation. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you want to dive deeper or stay updated on everything we're working on, check out our Facebook page at www.facebook.com/weareunderInvestigation. We'd also love to hear from you. Got questions, feedback, or a story to share? You can text or call us at 763-634-1210. Your input helps shape the show, so don't be shy. Until next time, stay curious, stay questioning, and keep investigating.